Right. Well, see, but that's the problem. Dude dusted half of all life in the entire universe. How are you going to follow that up? That's kind of like a no chaser kind of act.
Wow.
What's up, everybody? My name is Michael Stephenson. Welcome to my YouTube channel. You are currently watching my art/entertainment industry series, in which I talk mainly about film, television, with a sprinkling of publishing, as well as the music industry. So if this is your first time on my channel, I would ask that you please go back and watch some of my previous videos, specifically some of my early starting videos within this Hollywood is Broken playlist. They are what I call foundational videos. I'm trying to establish a particular lingo or language here on the channel so that I have a shorthand later on, so that I can hopefully make some of my later videos a lot shorter, and you will just know what I mean when I say the Lost Effect or the Avatar Era or things of that nature. So please go watch those videos. So we are talking once again about villains, and oh God, to me this topic obviously was important enough to make at least 2 videos on it, about it, around it, to explore the problem with Marvel villains. So in the first video that I did talking about Marvel's villains pre-Endgame or pre-Infinity War, I spoke about most of the problems that we've seen Marvel have with villains. The key problem being that the villains were in many ways not really, it's not that they were ineffective, it was that they weren't as impressive. They didn't leave as big of an impression on us, though, in the way that I guess we would want them to. The villains were kind of weak from a character standpoint, from a character building standpoint. Now, while that still most certainly is part of the problem with Marvel's current villains, one of the biggest problems, and what we're going to talk about here in this video, one of the biggest problems that the villains suffer from now in a lot of the Marvel films is the post-Thanos hangover. So let's keep it real. Thanos was an amazing villain. You know, you just, there's no way to cut it. There's no way to slice it. You can't deny it. Thanos was an amazing villain. He was fun. You understood his character, his motivations, even if you didn't agree with them. And he was making, weirdly enough, some points a little bit of sense, even though, you know, his logic was just so warped and flawed that it just, but still, in some form, he kind of came off as if he made sense about things. But most importantly, the biggest thing that made Thanos a great villain wasn't, and this is what I feel like some comic book fans might be missing. It wasn't his domineering physicality, although that was great. The fact that, you know, he manhandled the Incredible Hulk at the very beginning of Infinity War, that was something, right? Just wow, that was fantastic. Beat him so bad that it made the Incredible Hulk not want to come out again to have to face him. Of course, granted, it was also a convenient way for the Russo brothers, as well as for the writers of Endgame, to not have to use the Hulk anymore, ever again, really. So we didn't see a good hulking out, a good Hulk smash within the last 2 Avengers films. But it wasn't because of that, nor really was it even because his mind, because he has a tactician's kind of mind, a mental strength and acuity that is enviable even to maybe a Tony Stark or a Bruce Banner. No. The biggest reason why he was a threat, quite literally, was because of something that he didn't really have anything to do with. He was a threat because of the fact that he knew about the Infinity Stones. He knew about the Infinity Stones, and he knew exactly what he wanted to do with them. He knew how to use them. And of course, he then accomplished that plan. And the plan was so insane that is really what made him a threat. The fact that he wanted to get rid of, to kill, to destroy, to disappear half of all life throughout the entire universe made him not only a fantastic villain, but unfortunately, it made him a great threat. And I said unfortunately because that's not really a good thing going forward in storytelling. So, first off, we have come to a point in which we've seen tons of videos. If you're like a super fan, or if you're really just into this stuff, into the MCU, into comic book movies, what have you, we've seen countless videos here online. You've probably had going through a Reddit board or two. There's always Twitter, Instagram, even Facebook. We've seen these accounts which will list like, oh, this is a great Avengers villain that they could use, or this is a great villain that they could use. There have been, I want to say, at least 5 different videos here on YouTube that I've watched or listened to that talk about 5 or 10 villains that are more threatening, more powerful, stronger, whatever, than Thanos is. While that's great, while that seems like a fantastic idea, on paper it makes a lot of sense. In the comic books, it makes a lot of sense. But to the average moviegoer, I think that's a huge problem. The idea that one character alone, all he would have to do to destroy half of life, not just on Earth, but throughout the entirety of the universe, all he would have to do would be to snap his fingers. There's almost, it's such an immense amount of power that one villain can have that it's almost too much to overcome. And I think that that's kind of where Marvel is right now, where the MCU is right now. Even fans who know that, listen, there can be other villains out there that are big threats to the Avengers or to Earth or whatever, there's always going to be that lingering thought in the back of your mind that this villain, whatever villain it is, whether it's a villain that comes up just in a standalone movie, or it's a villain that the Avengers themselves are going to have to team up to face, all of it seems, from a theatrical standpoint and from a narrative standpoint, kind of not moot, but kind of bland. It doesn't quite reach the levels of excitement and awe that Thanos inspired. And I think that's mainly because of the fact that, again, Thanos, regardless of whether he's not the biggest, most strongest villain out there, or he's not the smartest villain out there, he did accomplish destroying half of the universe. It's just, again, that thought that all the entire universe, not just on Earth, all of the universe felt this one thing at the same exact time. It's difficult to think that we will ever be able to get over that as an audience, that we will ever be able to, in some way, shape, or form, recalibrate to think of any other villain as being as threatening as Thanos, or being in some way necessary enough to have the Avengers come back together. Think about this. Doctor Strange, and yes, you know, he was sidelined, he was nerfed in the fight in Endgame, but he wasn't really nerfed in the fight in Infinity War. And Thanos still beat him, and he didn't even have all of the Infinity Stones at that time. He was still missing 2 Infinity Stones when he beat, or was beating up, Doctor Strange, Iron Man, Spider-Man. Those were some of the most powerful villains, those were some of the most powerful heroes, and he just kind of, he still beat him. Now, yes, they didn't have Thor there, but the fact that Thanos was able to hold his own, even at the end of Endgame, he was still able to hold his own against all of them, and he had the gauntlet and he had the stones. He was in a position almost to make the snap again, even with Captain Marvel there. And they barely inched by the skin of their teeth, as one has said. It's going to be hard within the regular consumer's mind to come back and to think, yeah, there's going to be a threat just as big as Thanos. It's almost impossible in some ways to see that threat. people have thrown out a bunch of other villains, and I'm just like, yeah, no, they're not. Like, I just don't know why you would say or suggest that, oh, well, this is a big threat for the Avengers. And it's like, yeah, no, it might be a good threat for one film, one Avengers film, but it's not going to be a overarching threat like Thanos was for the entire Infinity Saga, for all of the phase 1, 2, and 3 films. Just the fact that Thanos was out there. He was out there in the universe somewhere. He was gathering the stones before the Avengers even knew really what the stones were and how they could be used. That level of threat is kind of where we are right now. And see, here's my problem. My problem is that usually for these kinds and these types of films, whether they are just straight up action films like a Mission Impossible or something like that, or whether they are a comic book film, or whether they're an adventure fantasy film like a Pirates of the Caribbean or Star Wars or whatever, there's this expectation of escalation, right? The the expectation of escalation, so that each successive film needs to be bigger, better, greater, and the threat needs to be bigger and better and more intelligent than the last one. It needs to out-top or outdo itself from the last one. I just don't think that there's going to be hardly any villains that come around, even though on paper there's a ton of them. But I'm having difficulty seeing other villains come around and actually being able to summon that level of threateningness to the Avengers or to the MCU in general. It's very difficult to see. Now, of course, the one and to go through some of the people who have been thrown out, Doctor Doom, is he going to be that big of a threat to where he destroys half of the universe? No. I mean, let's just keep it real. No. I'm trying to think of a storyline from the comic books with Doctor Doom to where he even destroys the entire world. Again, one of his big things has always been to sort of protect his homeland, protect his country, right? So I just don't see him being nearly as big of a threat to the Avengers as everybody thinks that he is. Yes, I know he's an incredible tactician in the same way that Thanos is. He can outsmart a lot of, well, the majority of the Avengers. He can outsmart them. But a threat like Thanos, no, I don't see it. Even Scarlet Witch, who literally is, she can literally change reality, or change at the very least the way in which people view the reality around them. Even somehow she didn't seem like that big of a threat after Thanos. I mean, neither in WandaVision nor in Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness did I feel like, oh God, she's just too powerful. She's just such a big threat. Like, not in this universe, not in this iteration of the characters on screen. I just didn't feel that. I didn't. So then you also bring in a lot of people want Galactus, and I'm like, Galactus is not really that big of a threat. To if I'm being honest with you, again, half of the universe all at one time. Galactus, he eats planets. Like, he has to travel literally across space, and I want to say in the comic books, at least in some iterations of the comic books, he travels fairly slowly across the universe, which is one of the reasons why Silver Surfer is so fast, because Silver Surfer can get there days or even weeks before Galactus ever even arrives into that galaxy or solar system. But I'm like, he only eats one planet at a time. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It would be different if he was just like, he lined up all the planets in the solar system and just gobbled them down one at a time, like just gobbled them down all together, right? But that's not really what he does. He comes on, he looks at a planet, sees how yummy it is, and then he eats it. I'm like, that's not really. Yes, it's a big threat to Earth and Earth alone for a time. Is it a big threat to all the universe though? not really. Is it a big time escalation from Thanos? I just don't see it. I just don't see it. Again, I think as an average movie goer and as an average TV watcher, people who have watched the Disney Plus, looking at most of the other characters and seeing what they can do, I just don't see it. I just don't see that. I just don't see that escalation of the threat. I don't. I'm even thinking of, and this, mind you, was a terrible movie. Honestly, if you really want to go there, back to Galactus. Galactus kind of, in many ways, reminds me of Dar-Benn from the Marvels. Like, she's going around and she's stealing resources and whatnot, and every time she breaks a hole into the, um, I guess it's the atmosphere. It's that warp gate thing that all the worlds that she visited has. Every time she breaks a hole into that basically can suck out the resources and whatnot, and it can destroy the planet. But yeah, she Galactus kind of reminds me of that. If I'm being honest with you, is it a threat? Sure, it's a threat. Is it that big of a threat to have the Avengers team up to do it? Honestly, no. And if I'm being completely honest, I feel like in some ways, the Marvels, Captain Marvel maybe could have beat Dar-Benn herself. Like, if I'm being honest, I feel like she probably could have beat her herself. She didn't really need Monica nor Miss Marvel. But that's a whole different video that I'm going to be doing on the Marvels. So yeah, I think that again, when looking at Thanos, whereas Marvel's previous problems with villains all stem from the fact that the villains felt weak in character, in that we didn't really know anything about them. Their plans were kind of vague, so we really didn't understand their plans all that well, etc., etc. I think that yes, it's still here, but I think it's compounded by the fact that any villain that you bring out is just not going to compare to Thanos. It's just not going to be nearly as destructive, which is why I think that one of the only villains that you can bring out, well, there's a few. You can bring out the dang it, what is it? Y'all know those villains that start with M. I can't even remember their names right now, but they are, I believe, heavily involved in the Battle World storyline, and so they're involved in the Secret Wars storyline, I do believe. But there's a few sort of god tier villains that you can bring out. But again, I just don't see most of those. Number one, they haven't set anything like that up, and then number two, I don't see a whole lot of villains coming in at this point and truly being threatening, because, and you have to think about not only we as consumers, but then also the characters actually within the films and TV shows. Like, yeah, there's a dragon. Yeah, there's we have a Doc Ock now, or a Green Goblin, or yeah, there is, I don't know, just throw out any villain that we've had in the last couple of movies, and it's just like, yeah, there's a God Butcher, but literally half of everybody that I knew just snapped away. So looking at these villains that some of the fans have proposed, again, Doctor Doom, I feel like, and obviously they couldn't do Doctor Doom because they didn't have the licensing for him, right? But I feel very much so like Doctor Doom would have been a great overarching villain for the first three phases. But now that we've done Thanos, it feels very much so like unless Doctor Doom somehow and for some way, and for some reason rather, plans on destroying the entire universe, which is something that we know some of the Kang variants have as their idea, as their goal. Unless that is the goal for Doctor Doom, I just don't see him being really that big of a threat. Because again, remember, yes, Doctor Doom has powers in most of the comic book iterations, and not just, the burned on metal suit. But what kind of threat is going to be able to bring out? And this also is in some ways why we need to learn and discover what the next Avengers team is going to look like. But what kind of threat can bring out Doctor Strange, the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, and Captain Marvel, and actually be a legitimate threat to all of them? And you still have Thor. Maybe Chris Hemsworth comes back, maybe not. We don't know. I'm throwing my hands up at this point because you need to have some kind of escalation. And the only thing I can think of is Kang. I think that he was, again, the best choice for this because he can jump through time and through space, through the multiverse. So he can destroy and do terrible bad things throughout a great many planes of existence, let's say. But other than that, if you're not going to have a villain who tries to destroy all of the universe, or at least half, let's say 51%, right? Because he's got to do slightly more than Thanos. If you're not going to have a villain like that, I just don't see it playing well for most audiences. Yes, it'll play well probably for the diehard comic book fans, but even some of them will most likely be thinking, like, yeah, that was pretty good, and that was definitely a character that I always wanted to see, but Thanos kind of destroyed like a lot more people. Like, did all the Avengers really have to get together just to defeat this person, just to defeat this character, et cetera, et cetera? I don't know. So I think that that's, weirdly enough, a bigger problem than the old problem of not really having villains that are very stand out, so to speak. They just don't stand out all that much, with the exception, of course, of Loki, who ultimately became a sort of kind of hero in his own show. So yeah, what do you guys think? Are you still committed to this idea of, yes, there are clearly plenty of other villains outside of Thanos who is that are much better, and they will pose a much bigger threat to the Avengers. They will make the Avengers have to re-team up, or have to reform as a team? Or are you also like, yeah, I don't know where they really go with this, because you're kind of looking for escalation? It's a tough one. It's a tough one. And it's not anything that I envy right now. Although I would love to work for Marvel still. But yeah, yeah. I don't have a sign. Hey, everybody. So while I don't have an official sign off yet, I guess I should do the whole please like, comment, share, and if you so desire and you want to see more, subscribe. But more importantly, I will ask that you please, please, please go and purchase one of my books. They are mostly ebooks, and pretty much they are all under $10. See if any of my work is actually any good, if it lives up to any of the things that I'm talking about here on my channel, specifically with the entertainment industry videos. So please go purchase my books. All of my links are down below. Thank you.